Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Ashley Santos, and I will be introducing our speaker for tonight, Amelia Holmes. She's the NHA's Director of Collections and Research Services. She holds an MSLS in Library Science from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. An enthusiastic generalist, she provides leadership for the NHA's Museum and Library Collections and Research programs. I also want to point out that Amelia is covering for one of our interpreters tonight who had something come up last minute. So with 24 hours notice, she is leading this evening's lecture. So extra kudos to her for making this happen tonight. And I will turn it over to her now.
Wow, thanks so much, Ashley. Hi there. That was a very kind introduction. I'm excited to be on the other side of the camera tonight, as it were, and share with you the history of the NHA's Thomas Macy House. And I do just want to take a moment to thank interpreter Jeffrey Allen Thompson, who was originally scheduled to do tonight's program. And without his contributions and dedication to the Thomas Macy House, the presentation tonight would not have been possible. So I'm going to share with you a history of both the property itself and its former owners, while also highlighting a few of the architectural and decorative features of the home itself. So as always, at the end of tonight's program, we will have time for a Q&A, so do feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A, and we'll do those at the end. Who was the home's namesake, Thomas Macy? There have been many Thomas Macys of Nantucket throughout the years, as you might imagine, so it's important to single out the one we're discussing today. The home's namesake, Thomas Macy, was a sixth-generation Nantucketer whose father, Obed Macy, was the noted island historian and journal keeper. Obed's History of Nantucket, published in 1835, went back to the original English settlement period and discussed the island's whaling era in extensive detail. Thomas Macy was also a direct descendant of one of the first English settlers, Thomas Macy, who came to the island with Tristram Coffin in 1659. So Thomas Macy married 3 times. And as it turns out, both because of just the advent of photography and just how things are able to make it through history to the present day, we only have a portrait of the third wife, Christina Macy. But his first wife was Eliza Swain, and with her he had several children, only 4 of whom survived into their older ages. Eliza died in 1823 at only 33 years old. His second wife, who we'll talk about more as we go through the conversation about the house, is married. His second wife was Eunice Coffin. So she was 36 when they were married, and she was the youngest daughter of Zenas Coffin. Together, Eunice and Thomas, they had 1 child, daughter Mary Macy Hussey, when Eunice was 40 and Thomas was 41. Together, Eunice inherited the house and property at what is now 99 Main Street when her father passed away in 1828. Eunice passed away in 1842, and the next year, Thomas married a 3rd time to Christine Stubbs Gale, and so she's pictured here. She was a widow with 2 sons and was 47 by the time she married Thomas. So she would pass away in 1861, with Thomas following behind her in 1864. So after Thomas's death, it was the daughter he had with Eunice, Mary Macy Hussey, to whom the Macy house was left behind. So going back to just thinking about the area in which the house was built and what that was like in the early in the 18th and early 19th centuries, Upper Main Street in the late 18th century was a mixed use area. It had businesses, public buildings, and residences all commingled, so very different from the way that it is today. In particular, on the section of Upper Main Street where 99 Main is located, there was a Quaker Meeting House just across the street at 98 Main Street, and an oil and candle works at 100 Main Street, just next door, so across the street. So there was a courthouse nearby, which is at 108 Main Street, and a number of other homes. Because the courthouse was located in this neighborhood, this part of Main Street became known as the Court End of Main Street. In 1799, Shoebale Barnard deeded the land, now located at 99 Main, to his daughter Mary and son-in-law Valentine Swain, and the Swains built the first dwelling there, so it was a simple 2-bedroom home. So just thinking about what this area might have been like at the time. If you're not familiar with the term try-works, it refers to, commercial operations. So there's the refining of whale oil. So, just think about what that might be like if this was your neighbor just across the street. Kind of gross, kind of smelly, greasy. But so at the time, it wasn't, necessarily the posh neighborhood that we would think of it as being today. By the 1820s, most of this area's businesses and the public buildings would be moved down towards the wharves or elsewhere. So then at that time, this court end of Main Street became a much more highly sought after residential neighborhood, since it was close to the Nantucket society places of work and worship, but it was far enough removed to no longer just be as close to the whale oil as it had been before. And it was during this period that Zenas Coffin, who already had extensive real estate holdings, he purchased this property as an investment in 1828. However, he didn't own it for too terribly long. He passed away the following year and left the property, as we mentioned earlier, along with other bequests, to his daughter, Eunice Coffin Macy, and Thomas Macy. So around 1830, this of course being depicting a little bit later, 1830 photography hadn't been invented yet, Thomas and Eunice undertook an extensive remodeling of the home, transforming it into the classic Central Hall Federal style we now know today. Notably, they added 14 feet to the west side of the house, as well as a sizable rear wing, expanding the footprint of the home from a 2-bedroom home to a 6-bedroom home. The renovation was completed by the end of 1832, and the Macys moved from their home at 7 Summer Street during early 1833. So if we take a look here, these two houses do look fairly similar, but they aren't. They're both located on Main Street. On the left, we have 99 Main Street, but on the right, we see 90 Main Street. And so the Macys somewhat replicated the home of Eunice's sister, the Crosby home, which was also built around the same time. So there is a story that these houses are replicated, and it is possible, since one was being built and the other expanded at the same time, that they may have shared architectural plans to help kind of copy the style of the home that she liked. So you can see by looking at the two homes that they have similarities, such as 5 main bays. They have a wide door with side lights and an elliptical blind fan. And one of the, their differences though, such as like the Crosby home, 90 Main Street, having a dual stairway entry, and it doesn't have a porch seating or a roof walk, and it does have this western extension that you can see over here. Once the remodel of the Macy's home was complete, it did establish them as one of the leading families in the neighborhood. So it was joining many of Eunice's siblings also lived on Main Street. And these homes were either newly built or recently remodeled around the same time. And so this also included the homes at 75 and 78 Main Street, owned by Henry and Charles G. Coffin, respectively. Mary Coffin's widower, Henry Swift, was located across the street from 90 at 91 Main Street. 90 Main Street belonged to widower Matthew Crosby, and Matthew and Lydia's daughter, Anne Crosby, also lived at 86 Main Street. So the NHA website kind of puts it nicely. The Coffins claimed Main Street a decade before Joseph Starbuck's sons moved into the Three Bricks at 93, 95, and 97 Main Street. So moving right along, Thomas and Eunice, their children and grandchildren, lived in the home for a period of approximately 100 years. Thomas's granddaughter, pictured here, Mary Eliza Macy, had the distinction of living in the home the longest, so she was there for 67 years. She became a fixture on Upper Main Street and really didn't modernize the house in any way during her occupancy, so did not take advantage of any of the developments that were taking place, installing a bathroom or anything like that. So when she passed away in 1931, she was unmarried and childless, and she left the house to her favorite cousin, Ella Still, who was at that time living in New Jersey. And that's when the house became a summer home instead of a year-round residence for the first time. And the house was in somewhat of a disrepair. just after Mary Eliza's time. And then Ella didn't really do anything much to improve it. So after she passed away, Ella, her daughters sold the house to parties outside the Macy family in 1945. This was the Todd family, and they only owned the house for just a couple of years. So in 1947, Jacqueline Garda Stevens Harris, who was an American heiress from Detroit, she had been summering on Nantucket for decades, and she purchased this historic home on Main Street and moved there full time, knowing, and she was aware of the historical significance of the home when she purchased it. Mrs. Harris was interested in Nantucket history, historic restoration, art, antiques, and quickly became more deeply involved in Nantucket society. She went on to co-chair the Main Street Fete of 1959, which celebrated the 300th anniversary of the English settlement of Nantucket by Tristram Coffin and the other English settlers. Mrs. Harris and her Upper Main Street neighbors are seen in this photo from this 1959 fete, and they're dressed in 19th century costumes. So next to Mrs. Harris is her daughter, Sally Gale, and her son-in-law, Oswald Tuppences, also known as Tup. And they're pictured here in the back. So while living in the house, Mrs. Harris undertook locating and acquiring items of Macy family provenance, two of which are seen here and which are on display at the home now. So on the left, we have a whale oil lamp owned by R.H. Macy, distantly related to Thomas Macy, and also the founder of Macy's, the department store. And on the right, we have the Macy family barometer. Mrs. Harris passed away in 1979. In her will, she left 99 Main Street to Sally Gale and Oswald, who moved into the home permanently, and with the understanding that Mrs. Harris did wish for the property to ultimately transfer to the Nantucket Historical Association. As I mentioned, she was aware of the home's historic significance and felt that, it should be kind of held in the public trust. She envisioned a historic house museum open to the public for tours, like the Hadwin House across the street, which by that time was owned by the NHA. And she had kind of envisioned that admission fees for visiting the home would pay for the home's upkeep and maintenance over the years. So when she passed away, as I said, her son-in-law and daughter moved in, and Sally Gale passed away just a few years later in 1983. And her will states, a quote, "If at the time of my death, I own in my sole name the house and land known as 99 Main Street, then I bequeath the house and land and the contents to the Nantucket Historical Association." But as it turns out, at the time of her death, she was not the sole owner of the house. Oswald did continue to live there for the 4 years after her death, which, at which time he also passed away. During that time, though, he kind of came to disagree with the notion of admission fees covering the cost of upkeep. He felt that the absence of an endowment was what kept Hadwin House from receiving timely maintenance and repairs. These homes are very expensive to maintain, and it takes a lot of work. As a result, he set up the Tuppences Harris Foundation of 1986 to provide funds for the maintenance. The foundation also, I do want to point out, provides for the maintenance and improvement of property he donated to the Nantucket Conservation Foundation. So the 99 Main Street is not the only recipient of funds from the Tuppences Harris Foundation, but is one of the main recipients. He passed away in 1987. At which time the house, Thomas Macy House, joined more than a dozen historic properties preserved and interpreted by the NHA. So let's now take a look at some of the rooms open to the public. So noticeable architectural characteristics of 2 centuries. This house, was lived in and updated over 100 years. So these 2 centuries, they can be seen since over time. So while it began at the opening of the 19th century as a more modest home, It was extensively remodeled by the Macys in the 1830s and has endured updating and augmentation throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, first by Mrs. Harris and her heirs. This included adding the rear hall and a redesign of the servants' quarters on the second floor. A mid-20th century heating system was added. There was an addition of a solarium in 1966 at the back of the house. And subsequently, by the NHA renovated the kitchen to be more of a catering kitchen, and they converted the solarium into a bar space for events. And there's even talk of perhaps adding central air conditioning in the future. So upon entering the home, visitors can see elements of the original Swain structure, along with the interior features of the Macy remodeling, including a traverse staircase in the front hall that connects the old and new parts of the upper floor. One of the most striking things about the first floor public rooms is their variable size. Most visitors are able to guess which wing existed under the Swains and what was added by the Macys, just based on the various room sizes. The east wing to the right of the front hall includes the 2 sitting rooms, and this is the middle sitting room depicted here, which are rather intimate spaces, so they evoke the humbleness of the Swain period. The floors in these rooms, which you can see a little right here, down at the bottom, so these are painted, and they're part of the original structure of the house. So the painting was a decorative scheme that was common in the time period that the house was built, and it was in order to protect the wooden floors, just to provide them with some coverage. So the dining room, which is on the other side of the house, is pictured here and is part of the 1830 extension. So you can notice here too the ornate trim in the federal style, which surrounds the windows and doors. So this is, not present in the other side of the house here. And finally, here we can see the expansive libraries. We do not know exactly how the space was used when it was originally built, but its current iteration dates to the 1950s, with reclaimed wood forming the paneling and the floors. This is Jacqueline's vision of a 19th century space, but the room would have looked and functioned differently in the 1830s. So now I just want to talk a little bit about some of the artwork and artifacts that are in the home. Among these, there's this portrait of Sally Gale Harris, which was painted when she was only 20 years old in 1937. In it, she's wearing a riding habit complete with crop. She was an accomplished horsewoman, and the home actually has, you can see just over here underneath Tuppences, there is a trophy that was awarded to her in one of her horse show competitions. On display in the library also is a painting of Oswald Tuppences, and this was done about 20 years later in 1956. He's holding a golf club. He was a renowned golfer, and so clearly depicted here. The golf course in the background is likely a portion of St. Kitty Head Golf Club, although it's possible that it may also be Tuppences Links, a private course he developed in the late 1940s, and he and Sally Gale subsequently donated to the Nantucket Conservation Foundation. Today, Tuppences Links is located, well, it's always been located just off of Cliff Road, but today it's known to many as a favorite hiking and dog walking destination. In the upper landing of the front center hallway is a portrait of Thomas Macy, painted by James S. Hathaway. He was an itinerant American artist who flourished between 1830 and 1852. In the latter decade, he found great success in Nantucket. He's represented by 29 portraits within the NHA's collection. As Nantucket's Quaker strictures against the vanity of self-imagery waned, James S. Hathaway was one of the most active and significant painters of portraiture on the island throughout most of the 1840s. There are also, just a number, it's a fairly popular, Main Street is just a fairly popular place for tourists and for plein air paintings. And there are a number of depictions of the house within the house, very meta. We have here a small oil by Ruth Haviland Sutton, a watercolor rendering by Doris Beer, and a larger oil by Paul LaPaglia. The house is not just paintings of Quakers and paintings of the house. We also have reproductions of Jacqueline Harris's Japanese print collection on view in the front hall and sitting room of the house. The originals are very fragile, and so that's why we have reproductions made. So the originals are stored within the NHA's collections, just preventing them from damage by fluctuations in temperature or light exposure. So we have these reprints in the house. And so Mrs. Harris had an affinity for Japanese and Chinese art. And you can see that by the ivory carvings, the porcelains, the garden seats, and painted screens found throughout the home. There are two more Macy family portraits here. Another is the one by Thomas Hicks. This one on the left here depicts Thomas's younger son, so Thomas Macy's younger son, Isaac, his wife, Anna Hussey Macy. She hangs in the library while her mother, Lydia Hussey, her portrait hangs in the front hall above the stairs. And one thing that is interesting about comparing these paintings is that they're one generation apart, and yet there's just such a difference in the way they're dressed, right? So the Quaker dress code Quakerism in general on Nantucket really changed in its hold on the island from 1800 to 1839, which is when these two paintings were completed. And so the portrait of Anne it just illustrates the luxuries of dress and jewelry just more prominently than we would say with Lydia Hussey on the right. Another favorite painting is this really breathtaking view of Nantucket from Monomoy by island artist Paul Longnecker. And this hangs in the middle parlor, which I showed you earlier. So I've mentioned here only a fraction of the art and artifacts on display in the house, which have been acquired by Jacqueline Harris or the NHA over the years. And now we'll go outside to the backyard. In the 1830s, Thomas Macy put in a greenhouse in the rear of the property for Eunice, who had developed an interest in gardening. Eunice's brothers contributed to her efforts by bringing exotic plants with them from their whaling expeditions, and they brought them for her to propagate. At that time, women of the upper classes were becoming more interested in horticulture as an avocation, but the greenhouse is no longer standing today. Eunice's garden was very much in the style of her time, more formal and boxed like that of the Hadwin house. But today the garden is just this lovely oasis in the middle of town, displaying a wide array of white flowers in a modern Nantucket style known as moon glow garden, because its flowers supposedly glow in the moonlight. So Mrs. Harris knew of and shared Eunice's horticultural interest, and she continued the gardening tradition associated with the house by adding a solarium, as I mentioned earlier, in 1966 to the side of the library. So if you're standing in this spot, the library is to your back and the solarium is just around the corner here. So the Thomas Macy Warehouse is one of the crown jewels in the NHA's historic property collection. Long a residence for visiting lecturers and scholars, the house is now also open to visitors for tours in the summer season. The Board of Trustees of the Tuppences Harris Foundation continues to meet at the Thomas Macy House, and the NHA events may also sometimes be held at the property. So it is truly a dynamic part of the organization. It's now open. So island residents who are interested in engaging through tours, meetings, and events can also experience this house and create their own memories for today and future generations to enjoy. So thank you so much for listening, and we would just like to open it up now for questions.
Hi, Amelia. Thank you. That was so great. So much to kind of take in there, and I will wait for the questions to roll in here as I open this up. But just to get us started, I wanted to ask, as an NHA staff member, do you have a favorite room or artifact or architectural characteristic of the house that you can think of that sort of like makes it special to you?
Yeah, I mean, the house is just, so what's really nice about the Thomas Macy House, I think, we have 4 historic homes within the NHA's, well, there are four historic homes within the NHA's properties that came with collections attached to them. So the Hadwin House, the Thomas Macy House, Greater Light, and the Macy Christian House. And one thing that I think is just really nice about the Thomas Macy House is that it came as a complete collection. So like Greater Light, right? They both came as complete collections, and the house is still intact. And that's what's kind of amazing about it, is that the other homes have over time been used in different ways for different purposes. But Thomas Macy House is still in many ways set up in a similar way to the way that the Harrises and the Tuppences lived when they were there. And so I feel like that's kind of really special about it. And I would say my favorite room is the library downstairs. It's amazing how if you're in the space, it is just so quiet. There's just no sound. And you just, as you're sitting there, there's just light coming in all around you, beautiful windows, and there's just so many birds. And so you just hear this like cacophony of bird song while you're in that space. So it is a really, like the presentation I said, it is an oasis, I feel like, in town.
Yeah, agreed. I definitely think there's just a feeling and character that you can feel when you go into the house, since it is a whole collection, and as opposed to some other properties where they've been used for other things over time. So we do have questions rolling in here. So did the Macy family also own 18 Union Street was the question. I'm not sure we'll be able to answer that.
I mean,
into it though.
yeah, that's a really good question, and I definitely would be happy to look into that further. If you want to email the library@nha.org email address, we would definitely be willing to look into that. I mean, obviously there are so many Macys on the island and so many Thomas Macys even, that it's possible, maybe another relative. I don't know offhand though that it was that same Macy family. So definitely send us an email.
Great. So this is a very common question. Is it true that Herman Melville dined at 99 Main when he visited Nantucket?
Oh man, that is a really common question, and it's a great one. And it's unfortunately something that we will just never know for sure. It's not to say that he didn't, but there's no concrete evidence that he did. So the information that we have, he was definitely on island. He definitely met Thomas Macy, but we can only confirm that Thomas Macy was at the Jared Coffin house where they were staying, where Melville and his father-in-law were staying, and that they rode out to Sconset, together. Or well, he rode out to Sconset with a friend. So there's like I think that the idea comes from that we know he met Thomas Macy during his time here. We know that Thomas Macy gave him a copy of his father Obed Macy's book, A History of Nantucket, and we know that the day afterwards they dined with a friend. We don't know who that friend was. We don't know where they ate. So yes, it could have been Thomas Macy, but it could have been just about anyone else as well.
Great. So another question, which is actually kind of in line with the question I had, just about the remodeling when Thomas and Eunice remodeled, how common was that at the time? And someone asked when were the bathrooms added to the house, which I'm not sure we'll have the exact year, but was it common at that point to start remodeling? It seems like a lot of historic homes over time have been expanded or additions are added. So I just was curious about how common that was.
Yeah, so I don't know that I am the best person to answer this question, but I do know that based on my reading for tonight's presentation, there were a number of homes in that area. So like I was saying, the house, the business aspect of Upper Main Street was moving into town. This was becoming a more desirable place to live. And so, people were definitely upgrading their homes. The 3 bricks were being built, just a few years later. The Hadwin house and the house next door to it, the 2 Hadwin homes, were both being built. I mean, it was just a lot of development happening over this period. And I mean, Nantucket was still fairly prosperous at this point. So it kind of makes sense that people would want to be upgrading and just like, living their best lives, essentially.
Definitely.
And then, the question about the bathrooms, actually, so I don't know exactly when it is known when they were added, but I don't in this moment know the exact year. It was sometime in the middle of the 20th century. But one thing that I thought was interesting is that, like, how did they fit the bathrooms in there, right? Because there weren't bathrooms before, and now it's not like the house got bigger. So what I thought was interesting is that they actually took out fireplaces There were double, if you're in the house, you can see in like the two parlors on the right side of the house, there's like a double facing fireplace, so a fireplace on both sides of the wall. And so they removed fireplaces to make room for the bathrooms, which is pretty cool.
That is cool. It sounds like a lot of work, but very cool.
Yeah.
You might have said this, but a question, do you know who painted the portraits of the Tuppences? Did we have a note in those?
We do know that, but I do not know that right
Yeah, well,
now.
I don't know if it was actually noted in the presentation or not. But
It's not. Yeah, but it is knowable. If you want to, again, reach out at library@nha.org, I can definitely get you that information.
Okay. Can you talk about the hearth in the basement and when this was used?
Yeah, so I didn't show the basement. Yeah, so the basement of 99 Main is probably like the cleanest basement you may ever see in your entire life. Like certainly in my experience, it is incredibly clean. And it is, you can see how, I just feel like it is very clear down there how the house has expanded over time. And so there's a fireplace kind of close to the front of the house underneath it. So that was the original kitchen of the home. And you can see where there are stairs underneath what's now the dining room. So that would have been how people would have gotten underneath into this kitchen area. And then when the house was expanded, there is this like larger kitchen space, kind of like underneath where the it's underneath where the fireplace is in the library. And it is more expansive. If you look at the Habs report online, which you can see through the Library of Congress's website, it is pretty intense. There's a little kettle over to this. There's like different doors, different contraptions. And this was used at that time, like when the house was expanded. It's definitely not a question I can answer offhand about how long it was used and when they switched to the kitchen, to having a kitchen upstairs, but definitely something I'd be happy to look into further and if someone wanted to reach out on that.
Great. Another question was, what are the oldest furnishings in the house? Do we know, or do you know off the top of your head, whether it's a furnishing or is there something that, whether it's one of the paintings or artifacts on display, is there anything that comes to mind that you sort of have a sense of this was definitely any kind of original to the Macy family? Or
I feel like this is the sort of question that like tonight I'll be like washing dishes and it'll come to me, oh, it was this one. But I think it, maybe would be some of the Asian artifacts that Jacqueline collected, since she was collecting things that were older. And so no, I'm not able to really answer that question in a way that I feel like is very fair right now.
no problem. This might have been someone who missed the beginning because we had a couple late joiners, but can you just talk about Thomas Macy in relation to whether he was a whaler or in a related line of work initially, any kind of history there?
Yeah, so Thomas Macy it's the same Thomas Macy of the Thomas Macy Warehouse, so located, near the Stop and Shop, and which is currently being renovated by the NHA. And so that was built in just after the Great Fire, actually. So, and that's one of the interesting things about, this is not about him, but about his building. One of the interesting things I think about the Thomas Macy Warehouse is that it was built just after the Great Fire, and so it has a slate roof on it, to make it more fireproof. So that's like one of the historical features of the building. So in this time period, so he was, in the business of oil refineries. So he was a merchant of whale oil.
Great. This is an interesting question, and I think I can answer it, but I think the answer is no right now. But she said, I noticed at many historic homes they're doing excavations on the property. Has that been done, or are there any plans to do so? I'm not sure. I don't believe it's ever been done there, and I don't believe we have any plans, but it's just an interesting question, since it definitely is something that is happening at more historic properties.
Yeah, that's definitely exactly what I would say. Yeah. So no, it has not been done. No, there are no plans for it at this time, but interesting to think about.
Definitely. And will Thomas Macy be open to visitors this summer? Thank you.
Yes,
maybe
right.
touched on that, but yes.
Yeah. So it will be open to visitors this summer. It's as part of the Hadwin House, Thomas Macy House experience.
Great. One other question, is there a plan to take the house back to what it looked like when the Macys lived there? Which I think, you know, they tried to really
Well, I like
reflect
this
how it was,
question.
but
Yeah, like I think this is a really good question. So there's a combination of things, I guess, kind of responses to that. So one is that with the NHA's current collection, right, like that would be difficult to do. So do we have enough artifacts and furnishings to completely replicate an 1820s, 1830s Nantucket home? That would be really difficult. And it's one of the challenges with decorating the Hadwin house, right? So like if we were to do a replica, if we were to take like all 9 rooms of the Hadwin house and try to turn that into a period appropriate historic home for when the Hadwins were living there, it would be very, like we can't do it because we don't have the materials in our collection to completely furnish a space with period appropriate materials. But what I really like about this house is that it's kind of the Harris's vision, Mrs. Harris's vision of what a 19th century whaling captain's home would be. So it's like, it's just a really, I feel like there's kind of like layers there, right? So this is like a mid 20th century vacation home on Nantucket, envisioned as a 19th century whaling captain's home, plus Chinese and Japanese art and artifacts. And it's in that way kind of similar in my mind to the Macy Christian home, which is also a early mid 20th century vacation home on Nantucket, but envisioned as like a colonial era Nantucket home. You know, and the Greater Light kind of even fits into that as well, where it's another interpretation. It's just another Nantucket summer home, but not decorated to any particular style other than the Monaghan's own. So anyway, that's my thought on.
yeah. I'll end with this one, and it's kind of in respect to how you said they transformed made room for bathrooms by taking out chimneys. But someone asked, any surprising finds during renovations? Is there any quirky things you can think of that maybe came up during, or looking back, obviously, as renovations were made?
So I would say that the best resource for this is the Preservation Institute of Nantucket's 1986 report on this exact thing. They have this, which I was reading for today's presentation. So they talk about all of these different little architectural features, all of these different finds that we have known. So like, for example, which light fixtures in the house were originally gasoliers, which have been refitted for electricity. They just really walk you through just everything about the renovations for the house. So I would just say that that would be a really great resource if you're interested in learning more about how the house has changed over time. And then just to keep going with like another shout out, I would also suggest Betsy Tyler's NPT, so Nantucket Preservation Trust History on 99 Main Street. So she would walk you through the history of ownership and the history of the people a little more in depth than we can get into tonight. So those two are just really great resources for answering kind of any of the unanswered questions, as is reaching out to library@nha.org. We're always happy to answer your questions.
Awesome. Definitely a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Amelia, again, for kind of taking this on with 24 hours notice. You did an amazing job, and I think everyone appreciates. We've had some kudos in the Q&A as well, and thank yous for you jumping on here and doing this tonight. I will just wrap up by saying thank you for spending your evening with us tonight. Media sponsorship for this evening's event is provided by Novation Media. And please join us next week on Tuesday, April 20th at 5:30 again for NHA University about Nathaniel Bowditch, author of The American Practical Navigator. And programs such as these are made possible thanks to our members. If you're not a member, please consider joining today by heading to nha.org/membership. And thank you again and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.